Let's embark on the Ark Republic to hear current news that's published. More than gossip and chatter, covering current affairs that matter. We talk issues with professional views, all keeping you in queue. We wanted a higher vibe for these days and times, to free the voices and minds, reporting the sign of the times, so all can build. Let's shine.
Greetings. What's up, wherever you are in the universe? My name is Dr. Kaya Shivers, and you are tuning into Ark Republic News. And today we're going to talk politics with our contributor, Sebastian Prats, who is based out of San Juan, Puerto Rico. How are you doing, Sebastian?
I'm doing good. Really happy to be here back home and really happy to be here back with Ark Republic to talk about politics yet again.
Yes, I am. I know it's nice and warm down there. We got a warm day, but this cold up here in the New York City area, it became very real. So I hope you enjoy it and never take that for granted. Me being from Los Angeles, I did for many years before I moved out this way. It was like, oh, I miss that weather. But let's get into politics. We're going to specifically talk about. I know that the elections are about 2 weeks or almost 2 weeks over, but there's still a lot of discussion around the Jasmine Crockett and James Talarico Senate primary election that happened in Texas. And Sebastian and I were talking. Fun fact: Sebastian being Latino and I'm being Black, we thought it would be a really good conversation to have to talk about politics. What does it mean to move forward? Full disclosure, I am an independent. I've been an independent, but I do have a lot, but I do have a lot of, I think, things to say and things to think about in the political process because you can be very active and still have an independent lens. Sebastian, welcome.
Right, yeah, just for full disclosure on my end, I've been a Democrat my whole life and I've worked with the Democratic Party before. I was a canvasser for the 2024 election cycle and I was part of Puerto Rico's delegation to the DNC. So it's certainly something that I've been involved with. I'm looking to stay involved with, just so everyone knows where I'm coming from with this. Yeah, ready to start.
Right. And if you have been a long time viewer of Arc Republic, Sebastian actually gave us inside action to the DNC in Chicago that took place. Thank you so very much because, little folk like me couldn't get in. So I'm glad that you got in.
Of course.
So let's very quickly, can you give me an overview of your perspective of the Talarico and Crockett decision and any entry point you would like to do it?
I think it was definitely one of the most unique primaries we're seeing, like the major primaries for this season, because a lot of what you've seen in other primaries, I'm not gonna get into detail with them, but with like Michigan and Maine, it's a matter of ideology. Whereas here, it's more, it would these are two candidates that are less divided between the moderate progressive conflict we've seen in other races and more the style of campaign that they're bringing. With Talarico being more about expanding the tent, from my perspective, bringing in disaffected Trump voters, independents, Latinos that may have shifted towards the right on the prior election or just sat it out entirely. Whereas Jasmine Crockett was about energizing the base and really getting people excited for this election. And in spite of the fact that it's a Trump 14 state, bringing out all the stops and not stopping at any obstacles that the Texas Republican Party specifically would put in her way. And it has very much carved out an identity for undermining Democrats and for undermining Democratic leaning voters in Texas. So it was it was really a unique conflict here. And it was, you also saw racial divides showing up because obviously a lot of Black voters are very sympathetic, very inspired by Jasmine Crockett and James Taylor, and she has a very established identity. She's been in Congress for over half a decade, whereas James Talarico, he's been in the Texas legislature around the same time, and he was only recently starting to carve out a more known identity back when the redistricting war started. He was part of the people going to the news talking about what the Democrats in the Texas state legislature were doing in response to the unfortunately successful attempts at gerrymandering Texas's map further with flying out to Chicago to deny a vote altogether in the House, in the Texas State House, that is. And it was from that he was able to really set himself up to be able to run a now successful Senate campaign.
Let-
But nonetheless, it was still very good, very
But
close.
before that's what he wasn't even running as a Senate. He actually switched to run for the Senate seat. Do you know exactly why that was?
Yes, there was a meeting with prior major players like Beto O'Rourke, Colin Allred, to set up the top Democratic ticket for Texas, such as governor, such as Senate. But James
White, white,
Talarico chose.
white. Okay, go. I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, sorry. I'm listening. Uh-huh.
Yeah. No, but I mean it's true. And when it comes to these things, we have to be honest about it. And it's not gonna help anyone to look the other way, be quiet about it. But
Mm,
and it's why I'm glad to be here today, because these are important things to be able to talk about if
right.
there's going to be any hope of actually flipping Texas. Otherwise, if we're kind of skirting around the topic or
Mhm.
trying to divert focus away from it, people are going to divert focus away from the Democratic candidate.
Right.
And if that's going to be the strategy, that's going to be a problem.
Right. I did say, and we're going to get back to because I was pushing you towards that because you had mentioned that there were a lot of racial politics that were engaged. I probably have about 2 more years more than you. That's it. No, but me just kind of being in and around and looking at stuff, and even some of my research specifically looked at Black female elected congressional women in the early 2000s and how they were framed in the media. And it turned into this, bigger lens in terms of how parties treat Black elected officials. And you said something that was really interesting. You were saying that Talarico had this. From your purview, Talarico was create this tent, bring everybody in, and identify disaffected voters, really Latino voters. And let me just say this, for decades, Latinos were like, oh, this is the sleeping giant. This is the sleeping giant in terms of electoral politics. I think also a lot of people were really interested to see exactly what the Latino response was in a Trump administration where you have so many issues and you're in a border state and you have a lot of issues around immigration and what their response would be in terms of who do they feel would represent them the most. Crockett, a representative, as you did say, have experience, has been one of the more vocal representatives against Donald Trump's ICE administration. She is known to go toe to toe. My question is that, and she did say early in her campaign, she's very specific about who it is that she wants to, who she wants to target, and which is, you know, criticism of the Democratic Party for years is that they attempt to reach out to these MAGA voters or these white voters or these swing voters or these independent voters, primarily white voters, when they really perhaps need to be focusing on who it is that really votes for them. And her being a Black woman and representing the group that voted the most in the recent election for Harris, um, it's really interesting that she basically took, based on you, if she did energizing voting and she was very particular on who that's a strategy that has been said that needed to be used, and she did it, and she was considered more divisive. But Talarico, in my opinion, I called him the humbler, gentler candidate. Was bringing everybody in, but it really, in my purview, was bringing more in Latinos and whites. If he could get Black votes, that would be cool. But in the numbers, it shows that whites and Latinos by far voted for Talarico. So I just wanted to point that out in terms of racial politics. A huge criticism, and I would love for you to talk about this when it comes to like how you vote, how you establish yourself in the political arena. And a criticism, I don't, let me not put it on Crockett if she said it, but this is definitely a criticism when we talk about race politics in America and what Latinos were even talking about when Trump won, right? And when ICE started hitting a lot of targeting Latino streets. I'm from LA, right? So I mean, I heard it in real time as my family and friends were telling me what was going on in LA. The proximity to whiteness, and how that is still something that is seen and perhaps could be voted against their interests. So, what are your thoughts on that with the Talarico? Talarico, I could talk all day and every day. So let me tap in and say, let me jump in on that. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts?
So in terms of actually with Latino voters, I would characterize it more as a kind of unique dynamic with whiteness because, well, especially for viewers who can see me right now, there are a lot of Latinos who do look like me, who share a similar complexion, so to speak. And you get a lot of, even with first generation immigrants, a lot of ladder kicking, essentially. Um,
What's ladder kicking for those who don't know?
Ladder kicking is essentially saying, I'm here, I made it in the right way, now everyone else has to do it the way I did it or not do it at all. And essentially what ends up happening is you get these immigrants who went through hell and back to move to the US, and suddenly they hold very, very conservative views on immigration. And it's not exclusive. So this is something that's that's been present in a lot of immigrant communities, especially in the US with the large immigrants population present in the country. Uh,
But why
and
why
it,
do they vote conservative? Give us the insight. And let me say this. This is a fun fact. There's a hell of a difference, in my opinion, between an LA Mexican and a Puerto Rican. There is just
oh
a
yeah.
world of difference. And I think a lot of people, when you say there's a lot of clumping, right? So when you say Latino or Latina community, you tend to get clumped. But there's so much diversity in that, just like with the Black community.
Hmm.
So I want to say that too. I want to note that. But go ahead. Well, what's the
Yeah,
what this conservative like? Why? We want to know.
I would say a lot of it is cultural conservatism, a lot of more not I wouldn't necessarily characterize as moderate necessarily because I think that's rather reductive to the reality of it, but it's just coming from environments that are maybe certainly more open to perhaps economic policies from the Democratic Party, but what some would derive more using more casual languages, woke nonsense, things such as that, they
Mhm.
may be more apprehensive. And for using something Talarico said before, they might see a clip of him saying that he sees God as non-binary, and they may get cold feet of him from that. Uh, on the other hand, and I'm bringing these up because these are things that the Texas Republican Party with had it been Crockett or with Talarico will be taking full advantage of with Crockett in a prior statement that she's responded to and walked back on, essentially saying that the Latinos for Trump have bordering on a slave mentality, things like that. These are things that do leave an impact and do foster this apprehension towards supporting the Democratic Party, supporting individuals who affiliate or identify with the Democratic Party, and especially with a certain entitlement sometimes where people see the numbers. Oh, Latinos vote in droves for the Democratic Party. African Americans are the most democratic voting group in the U.S. And it generates a sense of if they're going to vote for us, we don't need to campaign for them, which I would say is
But
wholly incorrect because not only is turnout a big issue, these are people you're looking to represent. And if you're looking to represent them, then you have a responsibility to make sure you listen to them at every stage you can.
so I have a question. Is a Black candidate, in your opinion, allowed to provide any type of um, um, insight? And let's keep it a fun fact. I mean, there are Black Latinos, right? You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? So I mean, Latino is not a racial category; it's more of an ethnic
ethnic category, yes.
category. But as a Black American, or somebody who is not Latino but is Black, can we say something like, or do you think Latinos are offended when somebody says that they're voting or the way in which they move is a proximity to whiteness? or rather than saying a slave mentality, say this is a colonized mentality, or this is a post-colonial struggle? Are there is that a problem? Are those problematic statements? Right, because there are some things in the Black community that they're very like clear lines, like, hey, this is something that we work with internally. Um, Forget your opinions, basically. So
I think the way I see it is it's less about statements and more about opening up these discussions among communities, because at the end of the day, this when we're talking about shared struggles among the Black community and Latinos, a lot of it does, strictly speaking, overlap a lot. The Venn diagram between the issues we face is closer to a circle than it is to two separate uh, globes of issues. But when it comes to being able to face these together and with understanding the differences in our own experiences as separate communities, and when it comes to Latinos, the how that manifests between Afro Latinos, white Latinos, people who are more somewhere in between, things like that. It's I think it's more effective to work towards conversations and bridging gaps between our communities, rather than any specific kind of statement, if that makes sense.
right. So I'm gonna call bullshit on that. I
Go
am
ahead.
going to call the absolute BS on that. As somebody who has been in a lot of spaces that talks about, in LA, they use this term black and brown, black and brown. But when it gets down to the get down to it, there is no such coalition as black and brown. It gets very much, this is Latino community stuff and this is Black community. And I think that that type of language, or those intentions might be well intentioned, but historically that's not what we're seeing, which is, I think, the huge indicator in the Talarico Crockett case. Now, I'm not hating. I mean, it is what it is. People are going to vote. People are going to vote to what they think is their best interest, however their mind is, or whatever their purview is, whatever, I'm saying, it could be a lot of factors. What your family says, your pastors or your priest says, what your community says. But I think that we really haven't had enough honest discussions. And how does that discussion translate in actual action? Right. So as well-meaning as well-intentioned, we are now at a moment where it's a lot on the line. And somebody like and mind you, I've been in enough spaces where the way in which I'm articulating myself can be a point of uncomfortability for folk, Black and Latino, because I am a woman, right? And how dare I be so assertive, in the conversation? Those are things that I think also play into why Crockett is considered divisive. Like, my thing is that, she said Latinos have slave mentality. She's divisive. When Hillary Clinton called Trump supporters deplorable, she wasn't considered divisive, right? Isn't this really, I mean, in terms of in the Democratic Party? But I mean, I know she was talking about Trump, but it wasn't termed that way. But I'm not saying that her the way in which she talked about it. I mean, there was in fact slavery, in Latin America, Cuba, and Brazil, Puerto Rico. I mean, so it wasn't that. I don't think there. For me, historically, I don't think it was a. I think what she said was not inaccurate. I think because it came from her, it was more offensive. Because I want to move the conversation into, there's still, as you said at the beginning, this initiative to turn or flip Texas, the Talarico or the Senate. It's undetermined yet who the GOP candidate is going to be, because there's a runoff coming up. But what do you think it's going to take for somebody like a Talarico to win? Now, mind you, in all this stuff about Talarico saying God is non-binary and all these woke things emerge after the election too, right? And I'm wondering if it would have been a different election if those things were, because I think people were like, he's a good Christian, legislator with values and everything. And when this comes out, it's something that ruptures traditional Christian ethos, with some of the things that he said, him acknowledging his privilege with his white skin, all those stuff. Some of these people don't want to hear this that voted for him. They're like, oh no. Okay, but anyway, so what do you think is going to take for Talarico to win?
Well, I think first of all, it has to come with a clear vision that this is going to be extraordinarily difficult. This is a Trump plus 14 state we're talking about. And even if Ken Paxton ends up being the Republican nominee, there is still an enormous base of diehard Republicans in Texas. And it's going to take a lot of work to not just bridge gaps, but assure every single Democratic voter in Texas that this can be done. And that means white, that means Latino, that means black, that means Asian. Every single one in Texas needs to be certain that this can be done for it to happen. Uh, and when it comes to now in the post-primary campaign for Talarico to win win the trust of black voters across Texas, many again who backed Crockett, I think of this Jubilee video he did before the primary where it was actually a black man who asked him uh, about why his vote matters. And Talarico's answer was the reason your vote matters is just the same reason that they're trying to suppress your vote. The Republican Party in Texas would not be working their butts off to suppress every Democratic vote possible if it didn't matter, if every single one of those didn't matter. And that also brings me to what happened in Dallas County during the primary. There were reports on election day of voter suppression, people going to polling sites and being told, no, you have to go to that one. And then they go to that one and they're told to go back to the original. And it was causing a lot of confusion, a lot of chaos. And what ended up happening was Dallas County, in the end, seemingly had lower turnout, but it was really a result of people's votes not being counted. And there were things leading up to this with mail-in ballots and people who did the right things, did exactly what the law says they have to do, and they did it with plenty of time, and their vote was not counted. I saw someone actually who I met at the DNC who had to fly in from Virginia to vote in person because his mail-in ballot was not accepted. That's the kind of thing we're seeing here. And what worries me also is when discussions are being held about that part of the primary, I think people are missing the forest for the trees. They're focusing on how it looked like in the primary, if it made the difference for Crockett or not. When if you ask me, because of Ken Paxton's role in that too, with causing further chaos at the literal last minute, I think it was a test to see if that's something he can do in election day.
Mhm.
Because even though this is the man who cheated on his wife twice and decided to run for Senate either way, his campaign is smarter than it looks, and it's making some very particular and calculated decisions, which which I would say at the very least warrant taking his campaign extraordinarily seriously, even if he hasn't taken his personal life quite as serious as he should, if I may be quite honest. Uh
The shade.
yeah. And he's doing that in the Republican runoff as well. Even as Trump was originally poised to endorse Cornyn, what Paxton said is, I'll drop out if you abolish the filibuster and pass the Save America Act. The act passing the Senate, reasonable goal in the current state of things. Abolishing the filibuster, absolutely not. And that's the gamble he took, and it makes him look more among the Republican voter base for that primary. It might make him look more favorable because he's open to dropping out under a borderline impossible circumstance. In addition to just the fact that, judging by the polling right now, after once the runoff was confirmed, he's still definitely in a competitive position, even in the small amount of polls we've had with hypothetical Trump endorsements inserted. So there's still, going back to the original point here with flipping Texas, I think we cannot, if we want to pull this off, we cannot for a single day from here to election day take Ken Paxton as a joke. Because he may be a very weak candidate, regardless for what elected office he's seeking. except ironically enough, the Republican nomination, but it's still Texas, and he is someone who can game the system gleefully to get away with a victory that he might not even earn come election day. Uh, so to put in some bullet points, take Ken Paxton seriously, Talarico has to win over black voters, and ensure turnout from every single demographic that leans Democratic or is Democratic in Texas. Those are the big three things I think that Democrats and Talarico's campaign need to focus on to flip Texas blue this November.
Right. I think when black voters should be the first priority. For
Mhm.
Talarico, I don't know what that looks like right now. I mean, I'm not a Texan, so
Neither am I.
I don't know what the sentiment is, but I do know that those who voted and those who did not, but are definitely aware of the political process, were in terms of the black voters or the black political landscape, part and parcel, were supportive of Crockett. I think part of the issue is, or where we are now in terms of this intersection, and I think it's a really great intersection, is that though no longer is the day where you could be Bill Clinton, as we used to say back in the day, where you could go to a church, hold a baby, play a saxophone, and get legitimized, or more recently, like with the Joe Biden, who used Clyburn in order to get
Yeah.
the vote for the presidency. It's going to look a lot different. If Talarico wants to, he has to earn the black vote. And earning the black vote, you have to create a very kind of clear agenda of what that looks like in terms of what is economic. The economy right now is number one across the board, and you also have protections in terms of systemic corruption and police abuse. But in a Trump era, a lot of people are hurting. Particularly when you talk about the Black Texan, I want to talk about the voting. So this is another thing I think most is important to point out. All of this voter disenfranchisement that happened along the way to get to this election, and then even on the day, you have voter disenfranchisement, as you pointed out, in Dallas County, but still, Crockett was only 100,000 voters short, and a lot of voters did not participate. So one of the bigger issues that we have, other than the voter suppression that's happening, is getting voters to the polls, just period, just in general. So I think that's going to be a huge push that is needed. But whoever Talarico's team is that they need to remix and revise exactly what it is they say, because after and I said this, you don't hate the player, you hate the game. So in a campaign primary where you framed yourself in one way, it's not going to work in the election, in terms of if you truly want the black vote and what that looks like. So and we're going to talk more. I would like us to continue to talk more about the Texas election. I know there's more numbers and everything, but I really want to see, after who wins the GOP primary, what that is going to
Yeah.
look like. But what we know across the board, there's just a lot of there, and this has been happening, especially like one of the huge red flags was in 2000. When I was in my 20s and kind of looking at this stuff and everything, and how the voting system just changed over, and how with the electronic voting systems, there was a lot of during that time, was this 26 years ago, the concern was with these electronic machines, there could be a lot of manipulation, which we are seeing, right? And also at that time in 2000, there was a purge of the voter polls. So there's so many just different things, that play into this, that I want us to talk more about. But I want to could you give me some of your last thoughts in terms of just in general, in this new voting, or this 2026 midterm cycle? It's already predicted that the Democrats will overwhelmingly win, right? But I'm just trying to think about, what do we need to do? I'm not a Democrat, but what needs to be done differently in terms of what that looks like going to the polls? Like, because I think that kind of might take people for granted. People are like, oh, the Democrats are going to win anyway, I don't need to participate. But
Yeah, I think a lot of it is the Democratic Party is still in this phase of soul searching in the wake of the 2024 election. And well, simply put, we need to wrap that up soon. We need to find our soul. We need to find the playbook for what's going to be the next generation of leadership in the party. The Presumably the next Democratic nominee for president, possibly the next president of the United States.
Mhm.
This is where that starts, really. The kind of candidates who make it past primaries, the kind of candidates that overperform the national environment as a whole. These kinds of things are going to be what's shaping up the future of this country, the future of the party. And that's why the other primaries I briefly mentioned earlier, Michigan and Maine, those are very much ideological battles. And even if these candidates in 90% of the bills that come in front of them in the Senate would vote the same way, it's that 10% that matters. And it's the kind of bills they would introduce, the kind of messaging that works for voters, that motivates people to come out and participate in primaries and the general election, that's going to be making the whole difference here, because people are very much tired of the same old playbook and the same physically old candidates. You've seen a lot of retirements from the GOP and a lot of challenges to incumbents in the Democratic Party. And it's not just a matter of age, it's a matter of ideology. People, even beyond the difference of moderate and progressive, they want people who communicate differently, who talk about issues with different language that isn't this more corporate washed, tested language, that's more honest, that sounds like it's a person talking, and this it's not something that's been necessarily tested thoroughly and approved by several dozen email chains. It's truly a lot to parse through, is really what's happening. I think Democrats are going to do well. The question really is which kinds of Democrats are going to do best and what kind of signals that's going to be sending to potential 2028 contenders, people who are eyeing the presidency already and just holding their breath for what happens this November and in the coming months after. I would make especially big note of the House, because something that, for example, I've seen AOC harp on a lot is the reason the House majority matters is because that's gavels. That's the ability to open investigation. It's not just about the votes, it's about the power that comes with holding the House of Representatives. And with the Senate, I think the key there longer term is if there's any more Supreme Court justices that Trump can appoint, which I think is the long-term impact of his first term, the most immense long-term impact from that first term, certainly the Supreme Court justices, if Democrats win the Senate, they can make any judicial appointment a living nightmare for him. And if it's with flipping Texas and with a Fetterman-proof majority, especially, that would be a dream scenario for Democrats, but it's also why every one of these elections matter, no matter how long of a shot it is.
What do you mean a Fetterman approved majority?
A Fetterman proof
Oh,
majority.
Fetterman proof. Oh, okay. I'm about to say,
Yeah,
do
just
we
in
care
case
what Fetterman
he
approves or
wishes
not?
to.
Anyway.
No, 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 no. Because if I remember correctly, the numbers is he's voted with Trump
Oh yeah, he's yeah.
like 15, 25% of the time.
Yeah.
So when people talk about the Senate majority, it's, well, John Fetterman could choose to vote with Republicans this time again. And it's accusation. Candidates are being accused of being the next Fetterman with Grand Planner in Maine or Talarico here in Texas. And what I
Right.
saw someone say the other day is no one thought Fetterman was going to be Fetterman until it happened. But it is at the same time a very reasonable concern, because the sense of betrayal that man has has fostered, not just in Democrats from Pennsylvania but across the nation, is very, very deep. You don't become a household name the way he has without really, really hurting people who had evidently once believed in him.
Right, especially this blue collar base, right? That basically, ascends him into the position. Um, I sat in and met, it was a group of us farming, and it was I don't know how long after he had the health crisis that he had. Maybe it's something I'll talk about later, but I wasn't impressed. I mean, he was totally disengaged, but I didn't know if it was because he needed like it was like some kind of device that he needed in the conversation or not. But like, I think he had to read what it is that you had to say on a device because his
A
hearing was
teleprompter?
off. Excuse me.
Do you mean a teleprompter? He had a.
Yeah, it was like a little box. I don't. They said maybe it was a teleprompter. So I don't know if it was because he was still in the healing phase. But it was a very weird meeting. But he was very disengaged, and people were talking about very serious issues. And his response, he would like defect uh, or like move it in another way, and it would be he would try to like playful it. But I was like, chop chop, we're not doing that. Let's talk about these. And
Yeah.
I think his head swung, but I'm like, no, we're not here to play. These are some really important issues. But that's all about holding people accountable. I think you made a really good statement that I would like for us to talk about further in our future conversations. Is when I started doing podcasts in terms of political podcasts, I came off the bat saying that all of these older members need to step down, right? And somebody brought out that there's still just I don't know, there's still a visible amount of baby boomers who are in legislative office. I am a Gen X. My parents are baby boomers, and having a baby boomer parents, I know the realities of just the simple thing as health wise. You know what I'm saying? So, and I come from the district that Maxine Waters has been in forever. Okay. And I've been saying that she needs to step down. And I've gotten a lot of pushback saying, oh, it's because of seniority and seniority ranking. But what happens when you have an untimely situation and you might pass, and then there's a scramble?
Yeah.
We need to be more about um, who is it that you're, and I pose this question, who is it that they're working with? But I think, in order to put the next generation up, the problem being, in my opinion, is they're trying to create these duplicates of themselves. And what you're talking about, the language, that was excellent. The language just doesn't even apply anymore. People don't want to hear that as much. I think criticism as Jasmine Crockett had about how she talks and her talking a specific way, hip hop, Black culture has changed the language in America, period. You cannot have this very rigid or cryptic language that is often used, or these behaviors that treat the common voter like very dismissively. I've engaged in that. You cannot have that anymore. It is not going to energize or get people out. So I'm glad you raised that, because I really want to talk about as the younger voters are coming. So we're talking about maybe like the younger millennials down to the Gen Zs and so on. And what does that look like? And what is it that you all need from a Gen Xer like myself or an older millennial in terms of how do we be the bridge to carry things over? I think that's really important. But there is, I don't understand the idea of like, this is not an AME church or where you work in the thing until you pass. Come on now. Like, and I worked on the Hill. You worked on the Hill. It's a lot walking from, you know what I'm saying, this building to that building to go vote. That's a lot of physical activity in itself. And a lot of people don't be on the Hill.